Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. Welcome to Washington, D.C., the House of Representatives and the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education. We're glad to have you here. This meeting is hereby called to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. That recess is going to come really close to probably 11 o'clock. The subcommittee hearing today is to hear testimony to examine the prevalence of inappropriate content in libraries in schools. The Biden administration is troubling response and state and local level solutions. Before I get started, I need to make a disclaimer. If you're watching at home or if you're in this committee room, we are going to be handling some very sensitive, mature issues today. We will be discussing widely inappropriate books that are accessible in school libraries. This content is uncomfortable for members of Congress, and it's certainly inappropriate for young children. As such, the committee recommends anyone with small children in the audience, or if you're watching on C-SPAN, or if this is a tape recording, you're watching it, you just want to reconsider young people watching this meeting. Additionally, children should not watch at home. We're holding this hearing to help ensure that young children are never exposed to this type of graphic content, not to further expose them to it. With that warning out of the way, welcome. We're glad to have you here. We got some great witnesses. I've met with some of you this morning. I think we're going to have a great chat, a great discussion as we go forward on this hearing. Like every flashpoint in America's culture war, the media has distorted the truth and fueled public outrage and discontent. Today, this committee will set the record straight with the American people. Inappropriate books in school libraries and local communities are within their right to remove them. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will inevitably accuse Republicans of engaging in widespread campaign to ban books. You'll hear that term today, ban books. What does that mean? And what are we doing to ban books? Because of animus or prejudice against LGBT students. However, the evidence suggests books are being removed for no other reason than it's just inappropriate. It's explicit content. In fact, 7 of the 10 most frequently removed books feature explicit heterosexual content. Additionally, the LGBT books are being challenged by parents such as Lawn Boy and Gender Queer. They're so sexually explicit that their respective authors have advised that nobody below a teenager is ready for these books. I don't recommend this book to kids. That's what the author has said. These books are so obscene that reciting mere passages, has gotten adults censored in adult forums. School board officials in Clay County, Florida, had to cut a microphone, a father who was talking about reading from the book that his daughter had access to for reading Lucky, for fear the explicit passages was violate the FCC laws regarding, since the school board meeting was being televised. Late night television refused to air an ad featuring language from Gender Queer. If these books are too inappropriate for adults, then they are certainly inappropriate for children. The committee will ask ourselves today, do communities have the right to remove inappropriate content from library shelves? Of course they do. School boards, communities, and parents constantly set standards of decency. But removing a book from a library shelf is not akin to pouring gasoline on it and setting it ablaze. It's not criminalizing the ownership of the book. It's not even making them less accessible. If you can check out a book from a public library, it's not banned. If you can order a book from Amazon and have it delivered to your home the next day, it's not banned. In fact, the most removed books are still wildly popular on Amazon. Age-appropriate content moderation by local school officials in the districts is a right deeply ingrained in the principles of localism and federalism. Federalizing the book review process by putting it in the hands of D.C. bureaucrats, thereby taking parents out of the equation, would be the worst possible solution. Yet that's exactly what the Biden administration is doing. President Biden appointed a book review czar to monitor the actions of local school boards and potentially penalize them for simply reviewing books. I see this as a dangerous step and a violation of federal principles. Today's hearing should not be about creating more bureaucrats or more laws or scoring cheap political points, but how to best empower parents to be the greatest possible advocate for their child's education. My final appeal goes to parents. Keep demanding that your school board reflect the values of your communities. Keep involving yourself in your children's education. And most importantly, keep doing what's best for your kids. With that, I yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Bean, and thank you to our witnesses. More than 7 months ago, our Republican colleagues sat in this hearing room and vehemently denied any interest in addressing the banning of books. Then House Republicans passed a bill they said was about parental rights, but in fact should be called the Politics Over Parents Act because it is essentially a blueprint for book banning. Now today, the majority is holding a hearing specifically about what books should or should not be allowed in school libraries, and I'll note that this is the U.S. Congress, not a school board meeting. Sadly, this far-right conservative movement is having a profound real-life effect on children, on educators, and importantly on school librarians. Research shows that as of 2021, more than 4 million students had their freedom to read curtailed because of book bans. That includes students across more than 5,000 schools, 138 school districts in 32 states. Specifically, PEN America found that 41% of banned content focuses on LGBTQI+ themes, protagonists, or characters. 40% focuses on characters of color. Rates of teachers citing burnout and what they feel are unsafe working conditions as a reason for leaving the profession have skyrocketed. At least 7 states have passed draconian laws in the past 2 years, subjecting school librarians to years of imprisonment and fines for providing books deemed to be explicit, obscene, or harmful. That's incarceration. These censorship laws are being enacted by extreme MAGA politicians under the pretext of parental rights, when in reality, it's a coordinated and apparently well-funded vocal minority of parents and conservative organizations pushing their personal agenda on others. We can all agree that books in school libraries should be age appropriate. And we all used to agree that the federal government should not dictate school curricula or what books are in school libraries. Regrettably, it seems that my Republican colleagues have abandoned these previously shared values, although I do note that Superintendent Degenfelder expressly says in her testimony, so how do we solve this issue? It certainly should not be up to the federal government. A book's age appropriateness and its ability to tell challenging, culturally significant stories representing diverse perspectives, those are not mutually exclusive. For example, The Hate You Give is a powerful novel taught in middle and high schools about a young black girl who finds her voice and stands up for racial justice as she grapples with the trauma of witnessing her friend being murdered by police officers. This important book elevates black voices and centers a historic civil rights struggle, but it's been challenged by Republican officials and parents in at least 4 states. I want to remind my colleagues that it is students who are most affected by these policies. In 1982, a group of students stood up for their rights, and they challenged the constitutionality of book bans. The case, the Board of Education Island Tree Union Free School District number 26 versus Pico, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which considered whether a local school board's decision to prohibit certain books from its junior high and high school libraries because of their content violated the First Amendment free speech safeguards. The court decided that local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the idea contained in those books. I'm concerned that my colleagues are waging these culture wars in part to undermine our public education system and to try to justify defunding public schools and libraries, preferring instead to funnel public dollars into low-quality private voucher programs, and we've seen that before. Thankfully, under President Biden's leadership, the Department of Education is using its legal authority under the Civil Rights Act to fight book bans in schools, including in Texas and Georgia, and is working to protect the civil rights of students. Well, we don't have students testifying today, Mr. Chairman, but their voices should be heard. And so I'm just going to share just a few. And these are students from across the country. It's from a New York Times article last year titled, "What Students Are Saying About Banning Books from School Libraries." Dia, who's from Arkansas, said, "Hiding away things that make us uncomfortable doesn't make them go away, even if we don't talk about it. Racism, sexual assault, genocide, and many other complex issues will still exist. We have to face the discomfort to keep it from happening again." While those supporting the book banning movement claim that it's an issue of parental rights, it's really an issue of people trying to ban things that make them uncomfortable. Jason, a student from Maine, said, "As a teenager, I'm still trying to find my way into this world, and I want to know as many other viewpoints as possible so I know my thoughts are my own and not just a product of a limited amount of information. Trying to force a community to get rid of a book is a way of forcing one's beliefs on the entire community." And Jordan from Norwood High School said, "Reading the article about book banning in these comments just makes me think, geez, the fact that these books are being challenged shows how much some people need education on the subjects in them. Finally, the Democrats on this subcommittee will continue to reiterate our focus during each hearing this Congress. Let's work together on important issues that will help our students succeed. According to the American Library Association, 2.5 million students nationwide are enrolled in school districts where there are no school libraries. At a time when many students are not proficient in reading and still struggling with literacy, we should focus on supporting librarians and educators in their work to help every student read and feel safe and welcome in their school. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bonamici. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the file may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Word format by 5 p.m. after 14 days from the date of this hearing, which is November 2nd, 2023. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous materials referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the record that the subcommittee from my colleague from Pennsylvania, Mr. Smucker, waives on to the subcommittee for the purposes of today's hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got an all-star panel. We went across the nation to find some minds and opinions that could bring light on this subject. So to help me introduce our all-star panel, our first will yield to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens. Miss Miller. From Illinois. Miss Miller. Miss Mary Miller.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce Mrs. Lindsay Smith. Mrs. Smith is the Montgomery County, Maryland chapter chair for Moms for Liberty. She worked as a nurse for 15 years until 2 years ago when she became a full-time at-home mom. She is the mother of 4, author of 2 books, 45 Days of Prayer and Daughter of the King, and she is usually found on a sporting field supporting her kids. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for being our witness.
Ranking Member Bonamici also would like to introduce a all-star panelist.
Dr. Jonathan Friedman is the Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at Penn America. He oversees research, advocacy, and education related to academic freedom, educational gag orders, book bans, and general free expression in schools, colleges, and universities. Dr. Friedman was a 2019-2020 Fellow of the University of California's National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. He holds an MA and PhD in International Education from NYU.
Thank you so much. Our third panelist is Mr. Max Eden. He's a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute right here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Eden is a research fellow and at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on education reform, specifically K through 12 and early childhood education. Before joining AEI, he was a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. In addition to a number of reports and studies on education, Mr. Eden is the co-author. Here he goes. There's so many. The Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestseller, Why Meadow Died, the people and policies that created the Parkland shooter and endanger Americans' students. He has been published in policy journals and the popular press, including The Hill, The Washington Post, and USA Today. Welcome, Mr. Max Eden. And finally, our final witness will now go to Mr. Burgess Owens, the gentleman from Utah. Got it. Let me do this, if it's okay. And I'm sorry I didn't coordinate with you, but our final panelist is Megan. She's the superintendent from Wyoming, and I met with her earlier. She has the state that is rocking in Wyoming. Yeah, Burgess Owens, you got the full story. Let's go back to the gentleman from Utah.
Sorry about that, guys. Mrs. Megan Diffenfelder, Superintendent, Wyoming Department of Education in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Ms. Megan is elected to the Wyoming State Superintendent of Public Instruction in November 2022, making her one of the youngest elected statewide officials in Wyoming history. Megan grew up in a 6th-generation ranching family in Jasper, and graduated from the University of Wyoming. Megan served as the Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education under Superintendent Julian Baylor. She oversaw multiple divisions, including Standards and Assessments Accountability and the Hathaway Scholarship, as well as $30 million budget and a 25-person staff. Megan also comes from years of private sector experience in the fields of coal and gas, oil and gas, where she's worked to lessen regulation burdens and government overreach. Welcome, Megan.
Welcome, Ms. Smith, and thank you, Mr. Owens. I talked to some of you about the 5-minute rule. There'll be a clock. 5 minutes is, if you hear this, that means try to wrap it up. Dr. Friedman, welcome. I didn't get a chance to talk to you, but you're familiar with our 5-minute rule. Let's go ahead and get to testimony. Ms. Smith, you are, first of all, welcome to the committee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks. Chairman Bean, Ranker Member Bonashi, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me today. Today I sit here in front of you wondering how in the world did we get here? How do we get from protecting our children to the argument of stop book banning? This is not a case of heterosexual versus LGBT+, nor is this a political issue or, as many would call it, book banning. This is about the innocence and protection of our children. I would not expect my child to walk into one of your homes and be able to easily access Playboys or pornographic photos. Yet here we are today discussing the argument of these kind of books being accessible in our public schools library, all in the name of education. I sit here in front of you as a mother of 4, 3 of whom were students of the public school system, and what I have witnessed in the last 18 months being allowed access into our schools is appalling. Instead of education being the focus, we have completely lost our focus, and now we have an issue of sexually explicit books being accessible to children 3 years and older. Books easily available to children within their own school media centers. One example is an innocent-looking book with bright colors and a puppy dog on the front. To a 3 or 4-year-old, this book is appealing to them, yet the language of this book is far from appropriate. In the Hide and Find glossary, 3 to 4-year-olds are encouraged to find images of leather, drag queen, and underwear. I want you to imagine very briefly with me that your 3-year-old son, with a speech delay, who is in the school for a language delay, comes home with this book and also read it out loud in class. This was my story and one of the reasons I am here before you today. When I found out this was available to my youngest son and would be used as curriculum, this mom began to speak up. In speaking up in front of my Board of Education and asking questions about the appropriateness and the age appropriateness, I found out that not only did parents know this existed, but they had been approved by committees not even known to the lay public. One book brought to my attention during this was Genderqueer, and the purchase of 8 copies at one high school alone by adults. Adults I don't even know won't even look at this book. So let me tell you why. In the pages of this graphic novel, we see a sexual fantasy play out. If you need help imagining this book, in one portion of the book, a strapped-on penis is visible on the partner with oral sex being performed graphically. The next is of a sexual position of 2 young adults with both parties' private parts all being displayed. This is just one of the 70-plus books in my county's media libraries available to kids 18 and younger. One school teacher alone requested 8 copies for his class and media center. Keep in mind, policy states that any book can also be used for resources in classrooms in my county. I would like to address, too, the lie that parental groups and Moms for Liberty are book banning. If removing a sexually explicit book from school libraries is what you see as book banning, then we need to reevaluate our language. These books are available to anyone who wishes to purchase them. They're available at my local library, my Amazon account, Barnes & Noble, or anywhere else that you wish to purchase a book. The books that are being addressed are sexually explicit books, like the one example above, and go against the very laws and policies that state representatives of the people created. We call these laws in most states minor indecency and obscenity laws. According to my state, Maryland Code Criminal Law Title 11, Indecency and Obscenity, Subtitle 2, Obscene Matter section, sale or display of obscene item to a minor states that obscenity is the act of human genitals, sexual intercourse, sodomy, fondling of, or erotic touching of human genitals. This law goes on to state that it's prohibited to show any minor willingly or unwillingly display or exhibit to a minor. A person may willingly or knowingly engage in the business of displaying, exhibiting, showing, or distributing to a minor an item with obscenity. Genderqueer is just one of the many examples that parent groups and so-called book banners actually are speaking up against. The sexually explicit and detailed content does not belong in our schools, and we are here asking you to hold the very laws and policies that were created on the very local level. We don't show porn in the name of education to children, and children as young as 3, like my son, were exposed to these books. What will start as library books will flow into the classrooms. Montgomery County is a perfect example of this, as it became the pilot across the nation for the next phase of anything new. It has been since the 70s from the research I have heard and seen, and it already is spilling into the classrooms of elementary kids in my county. It is time for us to actually be the adults and leave the sexually explicit books out of the schools and refocus our attention on the failing of our schools to our children in regards to reading, writing, and mathematics. A generation of kids needs to stop being divided over sexuality and actually start to stand up for the innocence of their minds. How do we start? Parent representatives from all different walks of life should be a part of committees that review these books. One of the things we have seen since we started to speak of the Board of Education at the local level is the ability for parents to actually begin to review these books and have a 30-day window for them to sit in the library before they're put onto a library shelf. The parents are advocates for their kids. We shouldn't be silencing them, but rather refocusing on the innocence of children. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well done. Thank you so much. Right on time and a powerful story that you told. Up next is Dr. Jonathan Freeman. Dr. Freeman, welcome to the committee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jonathan Friedman, and I serve as Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at PEN America. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and worldwide. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with an unwavering commitment to free speech, a principle that we view as an underpinning of democracy and a cause above politics. Today, we face an alarming attack on free expression, on the freedom to read, learn, and teach. Organized groups of activists and some politicians have launched a campaign to exert ideological control over public education, unprecedented in its scope, scale, and size. In 2021, after speaking with authors about rising efforts to ban their books, first in Texas but soon after in Florida, PEN America launched a research project to track and record book bans nationwide. Our most recent report on the 22-23 school year recorded over 3,000 instances of books banned, an increase of 33% over the year prior. These bans occurred in 33 states across 153 public school districts. Since we started our research, we have maintained a clear, consistent, and transparent methodology with one guiding principle: student access. If on Monday a student has access to a book and on Tuesday she doesn't, as a result of a challenge over that book's content, ideas, or themes, then that book has been banned. For that student, ready access to the book has been diminished or entirely restricted, whether that book is now locked in an administrator's office, moved to an upper grade library, or permanently removed from circulation, or whether that book eventually gets returned to the shelf after some indeterminate period of review. For the duration that student can no longer access that book, it is banned. Why? Because the circumstances surrounding such decisions are rooted in efforts to restrict access to information and ideas, implicating students' First Amendment rights. And in our society, the loss of First Amendment rights, even minimally, is injurious. Let me be clear, parents play a primary role when it comes to their own children's education. That's why schools have parent-teacher associations, parent-teacher conferences, public school board meetings. I am a parent of 3 school-age children. I check my kids' homework, read books to them, and advocate for them when the need arises. But we can and we must distinguish between a single parent raising a concern with a school and the current campaign to disrupt public education writ large. Between a parent who wants to accommodate a kid's learning needs and one who grabs a list of books online they haven't read and then demands that no other family should be able to access them in public institutions. Our students deserve to be able to access high-quality educational resources, to access works of literature that reflect their identities and the complexities of their lives. Not every book is for every kid. Not every book is for every family. But the unifying principle is that a wide variety of choice means kids and families can determine what's relevant to them. That's the purpose and the power of a public library. That's freedom. Around the country, that freedom, that liberty is being turned on its head, remaking schools and librarians from educators into censors. And again, we see targeted, organized, and replicated efforts to ban books with protagonists of color, books about African American history, books about LGBTQ identities. Efforts to take away the very books that many students, families, and educators say they want to access. Books that they say save lives. Over the past 2 years, I have spoken to teachers, librarians, parents, and students across the country. The stories I've heard are dire. Some have experienced direct threats. Others have been told that if they teach certain subjects, order certain books, or fail to ban certain books, it will put their career in jeopardy, or worse, will lead them to being charged with a crime. I've spoken with authors whose works have been mischaracterized and attacked. Over 1,200 authors were affected by the bans in the past school year alone. Ask any of them why they write. Over and over, they say the same reasons: to help kids see themselves and allow others to be seen, to provide kids the books they wish they had when they were growing up. As poet Nikki Grimes says, to plant seeds of empathy and compassion. That is what is at stake in today's movement to ban books. Whether we can live in a diverse society that upholds our traditions of freedom and democracy for us all, or whether we want to allow a vocal minority with a discriminatory intent to narrow our students' educational horizons. Thank you.
Dr. Friedman, well done. Right on the money. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas. There'll be questions for you in just a minute. Let's go to Mr. Max Eden. Welcome to the committee. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Max Eden, and I'm a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. For years now, American parents have been slandered by left-wing advocacy organizations and the media as book banners. My testimony today is simple. Books aren't being banned, but many parents prefer that school libraries not stock pornographic materials, and some school board members agree that this is reasonable. Now, citizens who hear the word book ban can be forgiven for being alarmed. Unfortunately, their alarm is not rooted in reality, but rather in the twisted abuse of the English language. The media keeps using the word banned, but that word doesn't mean what you think it means. In common usage, banned means made unavailable. And of course, the most banned book, Genderqueer, is still available on Amazon. The conversation rather centers on school library availability. If ban means made unavailable, then virtually every book ever published has been banned. But that's not even what that word means here. Indeed, a book can be both banned and freely available to students. The media has run with the twisted definition of ban offered by PEN America. As Dr. Friedman said, if a book is present on Monday, pulled for review on Tuesday, and then back on the shelves on Wednesday, that book has, according to them, been banned. If a parental permission requirement is placed on a book, that book has, allegedly, been banned. And if a book is moved to a guidance counselor's office, that book has been banned. It's a good thing that Orwell is still on offer. To provide an account that isn't utterly linguistically dishonest, the Heritage Foundation's Jay Green, Madison Marino, and I set out to assess how many of the 2,532 books that PEN's 2022 report labeled as banned were actually removed from school libraries. We did this with one simple trick. We checked the card catalogs. As it turns out, nearly 3/4 of the books that PEN labeled as banned were still in school libraries. You may have heard that books are being banned because of race or LGBT issues, but that's not really true. PEN America labeled the Black Lives Matter-inspired The Hate U Give as the 5th most banned book, a book that Ms. Bonamici referenced in her opening statements. She will be relieved to hear that we found that book in every single school library present. You've also heard that this is about LGBT issues, but when the Washington Post examined over 1,000 review requests made by parents, less than 7% said LGBT without also using the word sexual, although those requests may have contained words like pornographic or obscene. And that's what this issue is really about: the provision of sexually explicit material to children by public employees. Now, this is a question of adult judgment. Hustler has close-up genital photos, and most believe this is not appropriate for school libraries. Romeo and Juliet has lyrical allusions to sex, and most believe this is fine for school libraries. A line must be drawn somewhere between those 2 points. But where exactly? Take the previously mentioned Genderqueer. That graphic novel famously includes a picture of oral sex being performed on a wearable sex toy. Is this okay for kids? I've lost count of the number of times that parents have tried to read these passages at school board meetings only to be cut off because school board members insist it's too obscene to be read out loud because, kids could be listening. If you examine the top 10 most actually removed books, here's what you find. Genderqueer, Orally Inserting a Wearable Sex Toy. This Book is Gay, a how-to guide for meeting strangers for sex on sex apps. Out of Darkness, Rape. Later Gator, a discussion of the finer points of oral sex. All Boys Aren't Blue, Underage Incest. It's Perfectly Normal, drawings of kids masturbating. Lawn Boy, 10-year-olds performing sodomy on each other. Jack of Hearts, disposing of a condom soiled from anal sex. Crank, a meth-fueled rape. Lucky, rape, no meth involved. And A Court of Mist and Fury, which contains comparatively tame sexual intercourse. The Biden Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is investigating and threatening to withdraw federal funding from school districts that even think about removing these books. For example, the Forsyth School District in Georgia reevaluated Me, Earl, and That Iron Girl. Why? Well, in one passage, which I maybe shouldn't read verbatim, one character asks another if he knows how to perform oral sex on a woman. The other character replies no, but that he has been taught by Papa Gaines how to perform oral sex on an anus. Now, if you're a school board member who thinks that maybe school libraries don't need reference to oral sex being performed on anuses, you will be investigated by the Biden Department of Education. And if you're a mom who believes that maybe reference to oral sex on anuses is inappropriate material for a school library, you may be accused of being basically akin to a Nazi by an organization like PEN America. Why is it exactly that left-wing nonprofits, the media, and the Biden administration are so keen to enforce stocking school libraries with this material? I'm not quite sure, but what I do know is it's perfectly reasonable for parents to not want this material, and it's perfectly reasonable for school board members to meet their preferences.
Mr. Eden, thank you very much. There'll be questions for you in just a moment, too. Let's go to Superintendent Dagenfelder. We're glad to have you here. Welcome, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member and Committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Megan Dagenfelder, and I'm the elected State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Wyoming. I ran for this position because I am passionate about public education as one of the most important tools of lifting people out of poverty and fulfilling the American dream. The fundamental purpose of public education is to prepare students for jobs and to be good American citizens. But this purpose becomes compromised when our parents lose trust and confidence in our public schools. During the campaign, I spoke with voters all across the state regarding their concerns of public education. At the top of the list, among all varying communities, was fear of inappropriate and sexually explicit materials in schools. This issue is destroying trust and confidence in our public education. I met a mother whose teenage daughter approached her with a book she was uncomfortable with at school. The mother, rather than having a knee-jerk reaction and storming a school board meeting, read the book herself. What she found was appalling: sexually depicted graphic acts. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, this mother was not only triggered by the book, but also fearful that other minors reading this book may become conditioned to the material and not speak up if victims themselves. When they asked the teacher to opt out of the book, several other students spoke up almost immediately. They too felt uncomfortable. So what came of standing up against this book? The teacher became their bully, asking the child what the big deal was and why she was pushing this. This child now fears going to school and begs to attend virtual education. Her younger siblings will now be homeschooled because this parent has lost trust in public education. Is this happening with every teacher in every school? Of course not. We have many incredible teachers and librarians, but there are books available, paid for by taxpayer dollars, with graphic depictions of sexual acts that are made available to minor children under the age of sexual consent. I've included in your materials excerpts from Wyoming, one of the most conservative states in the country. Mentioning details of this book feels wildly inappropriate in a congressional hearing, but why then is it available to our children? Graphic and erotic images of any sexual orientation are not suitable for minor children and are a complete misuse of taxpayer dollars. It's common sense that a child should not have access to pornography while at school. When did protecting our children become so controversial? Why do parents have to opt in for field trips and medical care, but not sexually explicit materials? We must understand that schools are temporary custodians. They do not have free rein. Our parents do not cede their rights and responsibilities at the schoolhouse door. There is absolutely no room for distractions or inappropriate influences when ACT scores are at a record low, and the national average of students proficient or above on NAEP are only 26 to 35%. So how do we solve this issue? It certainly should not be left up to the federal government. I respect local control in government, including authority of books and curriculum by locally elected school boards. However, through our research, we found that many districts do not have a robust system or policies in place for appropriate library materials, and they need support from the state level. My approach at the state level has become working with stakeholder groups to create statewide library guidance to be released in the coming weeks, with sample definitions, model policy, and allowing for a transparent public process. Our committee includes parents, librarians, school administrators, school board members, all of varying backgrounds and viewpoints. This issue of sexually explicit material in schools must be addressed so that we can return our focus to the fundamental purpose of education and regain trust in public education. I will never stop fighting for the safety of Wyoming children. Thank you.
Well done. All of our panelists are all-star panelists. Get an A+ for coming in on time. If you're watching at home, we're talking adult material here. So a warning to all that are watching or here present. I will yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Fox, get ready. I will yield extra time to you. Let's go with Ms. Smith. In Montgomery County, Maryland, when you have said this is wrong to school board officials and other elected officials there, how have they received you? Have you found them being welcoming and saying, we're going to fix this problem, or have they rebuffed you?
To be honest, they don't like when I speak up because then other parents start getting involved. What we have seen since then has been thousands of parents coming to the Board of Education's, Muslims, Ethiopians, you name it. And parents are just shocked and honestly appalled that we're even having these discussions at Board of Education. Montgomery County is the richest county in the U.S.
Are we making progress in Montgomery County, Maryland?
No, sir.
I'm sorry to hear that. Let me go to the superintendent from Wyoming. What do we want to take away? What does the rest of the nation need to take away? You're having success in Wyoming. What does other states need to do?
Mr. Chairman, I believe wholeheartedly in local control and decision-making as close to the people as possible. But as I mentioned, knowing that school board members are made up of volunteers and have a heavy task ahead of them. My father served on our local school board. We need to make sure that we provide support to them, model policy and guidance from the state level. And at the local level, I think it's incredibly important to have transparency, to have processes in place, and to have public input. Those things are important, and for our local schools and leaders to remember that, again, they cannot step beyond the bounds of the rights of parents.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Eden, what's a better definition? You've already said others have wild definitions of what ban means. What is a real definition of ban that you want to put forth that we should consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think a book could be considered banned when you are no longer able to access it.
And that's simply not the case. We're just talking about what's appropriate for children.
Correct. And as I mentioned, about 3/4 of the books that are allegedly banned are actually still in school libraries.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. I yield the remaining 3 minutes to our chairman, Dr. Fox. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today to discuss this very timely subject. It's something very, very important to the American people. Mr. Friedman, I have a quick question for you. Do you condemn Hamas?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we agree on that. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back to you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The committee will now yield time to Ranking Member Bonamici for questions. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I want to introduce into the record two letters, one from the American Library Association pointing out, among other things, that a parent does not have a right to restrict through government action what another parent's child may choose to read, which would intrude on the other parent's right to decide for their own child.
Without
and
objection.
Another letter from the Penguin Random House opposing censorship.
Without objection.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're 9 months into this Congress, and many of our colleagues on your side of the aisle continue to focus on culture war issues rather than working together on bipartisan solutions that support public schools, students, parents, and educators by uplifting extremist efforts to ban books, rewrite curricula, and silence diverse perspectives. That denies students and their families an inclusive representative education that allows students to become critical thinkers and the next generation of problem solvers who will lead our nation. We do not need more efforts that turn parents against educators or transfer taxpayer dollars to private schools or attempt to extinguish the rights of LGBTQ students. Dr. Friedman, I want to start by setting the record straight. There have been some allegations that PEN America's statistics on book bans are inaccurate or inflated, so please clarify the accuracy of your organization's information, data, and research methods.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I do a lot of work on education, trying to help people understand freedom of speech. And I think one of the aspects that is so troubling about this moment is that a fundamental freedom that belongs to us all is being misunderstood, misrepresented, and twisted. And our definitions with regard to the banning of books and the restrictions in schools is tethered very tightly to clear First Amendment jurisprudence, numerous decisions in the history of this country that honestly they haven't been up for debate in half a century. The idea that schools have to conduct themselves in accordance with the transcendent imperatives of the First Amendment, that no official, high or petty, should be prescribing what shall be orthodox in public institutions. And so with regard to our data, it is based on news reports, it is based on scanning board minutes, our data is completely transparent, and critically, our data is a snapshot in time. So if we are saying these books were banned in 21-22 school year, we are tracking the range of prohibitions. And the reason we are doing that is because the range of prohibitions is wildly unprecedented. PEN America has been doing work on book bans for on and off 100 years as these issues have flared up. And I can tell you that 4 years ago, there was nothing like this on the scene. When a story would come out about a book ban somewhere in the country, it rarely commanded this attention, but something changed. A movement to encourage people to try to censor information and ideas.
Yeah. I'm going to try to get another question into Dr. Friedman.
Sure.
I just think back, I think it was in the mid-1960s when Justice Potter Stewart said, "I know it when I see it," for what is pornography. I mean, there's so many different definitions, and who's defining, I think, is part of the problem. Republicans talk about the danger of exposing students to books they deem inappropriate because of their personal values or preferences. But we really need to highlight the danger of ignoring, or worse, erasing history by removing school library books that portray representations of marginalized people, culture, or experiences. Books like Homegoing and The Kite Runner, those are outstanding sort of modern-day works of historical fiction. Books like All Boys Aren't Blue, a captivating memoir. It's affirming for young LGBTQ readers, especially those who are Black, as they establish their identity and grow up in a world that can be unforgiving and discriminatory. And I think about the Spanish-American philosopher George Santayana, who wrote back in 1905 in The Life of Reason, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." So, Dr. Friedman, how important is it for students to have access to a wide variety of books from which they can learn about the world before them and the world around them?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And those are the kinds of works that we have seen under attack, sometimes directly through challenges, other times almost carelessly. Somebody gets a list of books and isn't even checking it and just issues a prohibition on everything on the list and doesn't even realize that that book, that list of, 400 books contains picture books for children, biographies of historical figures of color in American history. I mean, that is what we are facing right now, and it is critical that we stand up to it.
Thank you. And just for each witness, just yes or no, please, because I'm about out of time. Is it important for students to have access to a school library that includes books from authors and on topics spanning different cultures, backgrounds, identities, and perspectives?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Friedman, is that important?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bonamici. Let's go to Utah, where Mr. Owens, Burgess Owens, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and your guests and witnesses. Some say that we are here today to talk about so-called book burning in K through 12 school libraries. One of our nation's most consequential books banning was done by the Supreme Court in 1963 when it officially mandated Bible reading. This book is banned from all of us. Anything to do with federal, that's no longer can see it, can no longer read it. Matter of fact, there's some that are listening today probably think this is totally unconstitutional. I can even hold it up. Due to the banning of this book, generations of Americans today have no knowledge of the tenets upon which this country has been founded. Tenets based on the belief that with God in time, we can truly become a more perfect union. They ban the knowledge of basic truths of happiness, like the Judeo-Christian concepts of the Golden Rule, which says we should treat others the way we want to be treated, or ban the knowledge of the Ten Commandments. Among these, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. We instead find the greatest disdain for these laws wherever Democrats rule. We find the banning of parents for school board meetings. We find where Democrats rule, we find the banning of parents from knowledge of the mental state of their children. Wherever Democrats rule, we find the banning of knowledge of what other adults, strangers, are doing to sexualize our kids. Here's a sample of the books that Democrats, the National Library Association, demand that we do not ban. Genderqueer features pictures of oral sex performed on sex toys. This book is gay, provides a how-to guide for strangers for sex on gay sex apps. Out of the Darkness contains rape. Lucky contains rape. All Boys Aren't Blue contains underage incest. Lawn Boy contains the passages where 10-year-old boys performing oral sex on each other. These books are available to school-age children, and there's no shame from those who say this is not right. I am very proud of the engagement of the parents who now recognize the rot and the filth that's being pushed in our innocence to our vulnerable children. There's a reason why the two words, too young, are never spoken by those who have no respect for parents, their children, or the family unit defined by God to raise and protect them. Last year, Utah passed HB 374, a bill that prohibits child access to pornography in our school systems, because in Utah we get it right. We care more about our kids and an ideology. Bills have been passed to protect children from internet pornography in schools, but students need the same protection from books. Our Republican majority this year passed H.R. 5, the Parents' Bill of Rights, that protects students and assures parents of their rights to know what books are in school libraries. Not one of my Democratic friends voted yes. Not one. Moving forward, our Republican majority will work to stop the entrapment of children in institutions who prioritize sexual indoctrination instead of reading, writing, thinking, and succeeding. Every child, regardless of city, state, zip code, should have the right for educational freedom. As we release the power of the free market and meritocracy, parents will have the civil rights to access a quality education for their child. Ms. Smith, one of the things you mentioned, that library books don't stay in the library on the shelves, that they can be used directly for school curriculum. Is this correct? And what is the implication of how this might be used for inappropriate content?
Yes, sir. Actually, my second grader last year read one of these books off the shelf, and he was very uncomfortable and actually had to leave the library and asked to go to the bathroom because he was uncomfortable. I don't think we should ever put a 7-year-old in that predicament. I think that we need to start thinking about that these books shouldn't be available to these kids in the first place. And for a 7-year-old to be bold enough to actually walk out, that we shouldn't even put our kid in that situation in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. Eden, we've talked a lot about book removal. What do you know, what I'd like to know is how do these books get into school libraries in the first place?
Yeah. They get in large part innocently enough on the behalf of school librarians who look at a list and see that certain titles are recommended as being LGBT inclusive, and so they purchase the books. They're looking at lists from organizations such as the American Library Association, which at this point is a wholly ideological organization run by a self-proclaimed Marxist who has said that school libraries need to be sites of socialist organizing. So there's an agenda in terms of what's presented to school librarians. School librarians take that agenda, possibly innocently at first, and then are surprised and defensive when they find that they're being objected to. And that's kind of how we're here today.
Thank you. I'm running out of time. I'll just say, Dr. Friedman, that you've made the strongest case I can think of why we need to have educational choice, freedom. Because there are people like yourself who will look at facts and studies and try to convince all of us that parents don't know better what's for their own children. This is a fundamental concept in our country. Parents have the rights to make sure their kids are educated, not the way other people want, particularly when it comes to sexual content, but the way we want. Thank you. And
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Thank you very much. Let's go to Arizona, where Mr. Grijalva is recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As a former school board member that spent 12 years on a school board with Tucson Unified and back home, the importance of public schools, and in particular, the value of libraries and the value of a diverse opportunity for all students to be able to access information and to be able to learn. And then that's the environment and the values that I learned being a school board member. They represent the values of this country. And I think access is the most important thing. And the other important thing is we're protecting protecting the children that attend those schools and treating those children with the importance that they deserve, and the teachers. And one of the things that I see is that erosion of that public institution. And part of it is trying to control what people read and don't read. And one of the things I was going to ask you, Dr. Friedman, and I think that is a huge threat to public education, part of this whole dismantling agenda that goes around about our public schools. I wanted to ask you a question, Dr. Friedman, and thank you for your testimony. I represented that school district, and much of the traditional, and because it was predominantly of color, the community that I represent now, and the school district was very significantly of color, and traditional academic canons did not reach those students. The curriculum didn't reflect them, the books didn't reflect them, and the subjects and characters didn't look like the students that were going to those schools. Can you just expand briefly upon the potential impacts of banning books? You know, in Florida, Roberto Clemente, I mean, he's a god, and that was put aside for a while. Certain poetry. Our superintendent of public education in Arizona, Tom Horn, feels that we shouldn't talk about race at all because it offends some. And that way, we don't have to talk about history because it's part of the story. And so my question is, tell them how it impacts students and communities.
Our schools are becoming more diverse, and research shows that young people are going to be more engaged in learning in schools when their libraries and the books that they have ready access to reflect their identities, reflect their families, reflect a range of their life experiences, deal with the complexities of the lives that they're living. And the purpose of a library is, in fact, to be that kind of wellspring of information. That's what school librarians are charged with doing. They're not charged with exercising a kind of censorious mindset about how different people in the community might feel about one content or other. They're charged with producing a robust, diverse collection. And that's what's critical.
Yeah, and I think, and I asked that question because the efforts, at least in my home state, and led by the superintendent then and now again superintendent, has to do more with the discussion today is about protecting children, the title, from explicit sexual content. But content is also the issue. And could you talk about examples where banning has to do with the content about what you disagree with an idea, a point of view, versus trying to twist ourselves into a pretzel to try to fit the PICO decision in terms of a definition of banning.
Yeah, I think it's just quite clear, and you really cannot separate the facts of what's been going on around the country the past years in terms of how many stories there are of people who are trying to remove books and being successful at removing books that are about black stories by black authors about LGBTQ lives. You cannot pretend that is not happening. There are stories in the news. There was a story just this week in Iowa about hundreds of books being removed under one of these laws. And that's been the theme for the past 2 years.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Sadly, we're out of time. I want to thank each of our panelists for our all-star panelists. You did not disappoint. How about that? Each of you has added to this conversation. I want to say that for any member who wishes to submit questions for the record, please submit them to the committee clerk electronically by November 2nd, 2023. I'll yield time to Ranking Member Bonamici. Any final thoughts before we adjourn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is an important discussion, but I want to also share some words from the award-winning children's author Judy Blume. She said, "I believe that censorship grows out of fear, and because fear is contagious, some parents are easily swayed. Book banning satisfies their need to feel in control of their children's lives. This fear is often disguised as moral outrage. They want to believe that if their children don't read about it, their children won't know about it, and if they don't know about it, it won't happen." Mr. Chairman, this is an important issue. We have freedom of speech in this country, but we also have freedom of religion. My colleague with the Bible, I'm not sure where he was going with that. But we would need to continue this conversation, but we also need to get back to doing what's best for children. Let's talk about the schools where they don't even have a library. Let's focus on that and work together. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out what I mentioned about how people have different definitions. There is a school, I believe in Florida, where a teacher was sanctioned for showing students pictures of Michelangelo's famous statue of David. That is bordering on the absurd, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to thank the witnesses, and we can all agree that we need to do what's best for our students. Let's continue the conversations about how we get there, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Here's our takeaways. Inappropriate content is a real problem. All of our witnesses really testified. I know we have different angles of how we come to the solution. Wyoming should be one of our leaders to let local control. I believe local control is one of the answers. The Biden administration's book banning czar is a real threat, and hopefully will still allow local control for school boards. Each of you traveled a long way, and you've added to the conversation. To Ranking Member, thank you for a great committee today. And with that, there being no further business before us, this committee is adjourned.